Thank you, Dr. Hill, and I'm going to be very short with my comments. Of course, it's wonderful to be here. I had many, many years of great memories as an undergrad, as a graduate student, as a staff member, I left to be a consultant in 1996, and I've been doing that ever since as a private consulting for what Dr. Hill just covered. Right. But as a private consultant, I can say that the Purdue River runs through that whole thing all the time. Right. And many times people say, well, where did you study? What did you do? Where did you do this? And when I mentioned, well, I was part of the Purdue Entomology department and just Purdue University in general, I could just see them like, wow, Purdue. Right. But to be honest with you, when I was a student here, I don't think I got it. I don't think I felt like, holy cow, it's Purdue University I'm at. And so we have a tremendous, powerful name and respect in academia and out there just in the general public, not just with pest professionals, what have you. But as Kate mentioned, a lot of times as a consultant, they'd say, well, we have 3 consultants we're lined up here to choose from and what have you. Your credentials are very strong and we're very impressed that you're a graduate of Purdue. So it's an honor to receive this award, of course. It's an honor to be asked back. It's some of the things I'm going to share in the next 45, 50 minutes. All traces back. I can say this with sincerity and honesty. To my training here. Right. And as I was going through it and, starting with Gary Bennett and, in urban entomology courses, what have you. Yeah, I have a quiz coming up. I have an exam coming back. And you think, that busy week in classes, not realizing that you're building all the way through for eventually putting it perhaps to work. What I'm going to share with you today and the consults I do to some degree, because it's not going to be just about rodents, it's going to be about principles of pest management science. But all the way through, when I'm working, I'm like, yeah, this takes me right back to I remember this course at Purdue, and not all of them even being entomology. Right, and then graduate school, working with Ralph Williams and Gary and others, and going on and thinking, God, there's so much to know about this particular species. I did my PhD on the house mouse. But to be honest with you, I didn't know that much about the house mouse when I got my PhD. That's the truth. I left with a PhD. I'm like, holy cow, I've gone through the process, I've studied, took the prelims and so forth. And I left with a PhD on a house mouse. The real education for me on the house mouse came when I started asking people to pay me for the services I delivered to them, how to manage house mice in places like I'm going to show you, places like office buildings, zoological gardens, airports. And so for doing that since 1996, it's been like, holy cow, I've got to try to apply the principles I learned from at Purdue and this kind of thing to this specific situation. And Purdue can't possibly, or any place can't possibly say you're going to know enough about your species, no matter if you have 5 PhDs on all the avenues that this can occur. So I'm going to jump in, you guys. I'm going to stick right to the point. We'll take questions and so forth. This is going to be very straightforward. I'm not going to present a lot of data. I'm not going to present a lot of statistical formula and these kinds of things. I have to, as a scientist in New York City and on a global scale, I do have to work with different cities. For example, I was working in Europe in September. In different cities in Europe, in Copenhagen and Paris and so forth. And there's models. How do you do rat management? How do you manage rats in Paris? How do you meet with the city and say, here's how we're going to do this? I just finished the Boston project, different. But the principles of pest science and pest management and this kind of thing for the same species, they hold true. So when we talk about integrated pest management, for example, a little bit, it's like, well, for this city, this component and model for IPM fits this city. And most of it fits this other city, but not all of it. Right, so I'll dive in, we'll get started, I'll go through some, I'll share with you experiences, but I want to share that this is in some ways really not about rodents. It's about pest management science and the overlap of how it extends, you know, principles of IPM and cockroach control. And so on it goes. So, all right, Branson, we good? All right. So I do want to, of course, say thanks. Thanks to the whole department, thanks to Kate, and thanks to the staff that's, you know, when I was submitting my package, you know, someone, you know, the recommendation said, you know, we're going to recommend Bobby. And I said, holy cow, you know, but tremendous help all the way through. And so just so fortunate, so grateful that I'm this recipient, and it's an honor. So thank you so much. How many people here have not been to New York City? Holy cow. That's surprising. It's like, get out there. But since, you know, it looked like to me visually about half this class has not been to New York City. Please come to New York City, spend your money with us. We're experts at taking it, right? But let me just share a little bit of a, as you can see, a postcard from New York City.
Oh, no.
So actually, and as Dr. Hill mentioned, I started out as a pest control technician in New York City. I had no money to go to college, went to a community college, saved money, eventually had enough money I could actually afford because I had no money to come to Purdue, what have you. So I worked in the sewers of New York City, literally controlling rats. That was my first job as an exterminator. You climb out of the sewers and people actually step away from you. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but don't come near me, right? Kind of thing. But let's keep an eye on, this is an ordinary catch basin, an ordinary sewer in New York City, right? It's, you know, we in New York City, we combine our sewer system into both sanitary and to rain runoff and to water collection kind of things. And the rat, the Norway rat that you all probably know something about, it's also called a sewer rat for good reasons. I went into the sewer systems in Paris, and it goes way back, the rats being in the sewers of Europe and so forth. Let's keep your eye on this particular catch basin. Keep your eye on the right side of this catch basin.
Oh my gosh.
There's mom. Mom just popped her head up right there. The large head right here is mom. Okay? That's her one family unit. Right? That's one family. Now, what do you think they're doing? Of course, you look at their noses. They're all like, we're ready for breakfast. Right? We are ready for it. Now, those two are really hungry. You know, they want to, so they're all pointing because they know at the same time every day a particular pizzeria was putting out their garbage when they were closing up shop for the end of the day. And they know just by time, just by their hunger drive, it's going to be ready. They do want their food fresh. And they do love pizza. Right? You probably heard New York City where it's Pizza Rat in New York City, right? You've probably seen that. It went viral. A rat dragging a slice of pizza up and down there. What happened? So, you know, this is New York. This is a close-up of that scene. Not the same exact scene. This is actually, I went out with National Geographic and we spent time picking spots. This is the famous photographer, Charlie Hamilton James. And just, he travels the world winning awards for wildlife photography. So Charlie, you know, he said, take me to where the rats are, Bobby. I'll shoot the pictures and we'll go from there. But I don't know how many people really like rats, but they are beautiful animals. They're very intelligent, right? There's lots, I'm going to share some things with you. All the things you hear about rats and how cool they are and how smart they are, pretty much spot on. Problem is, of course, That rat, right there, in fact, exactly, came out of that sewer and scurried beneath the door of a pizzeria. And was in there for 35 minutes. I was timing it. Came back out, went back down the sewer. Next day, I went into the pizzeria and I asked the owner, said, "You have any problem with rats?" "No, no problem with rats. We have absolutely no problem with rats." Because he wasn't in there. I said, "Well, actually you do," and so forth and so on. But who's going to want to put a slice of pizza down on a plate or something, knowing that the night before, of course, there was rats traveling through with who knows what on their body from the sewer? Salmonella, Campylobacter, what's it going to be? So right away, it clicks into place of this public health issue. Well, obviously, this is New York City, another Charlie photograph, terrific. I said, please take pictures of litter baskets and rats because the city has something like 146,000 litter cans spaced throughout the city. And if they're not empty before dark, all night long, we're going to be feeding rats. Now back to the IPM, because we're taught in IPM, right? I'll list in a second. Sanitation, exclusion, non-chemical, chemical monitoring, these factors of IPM. I went to the city and started out with the city. I said, first we have to meet with the sanitation department because we have to change this. This IPM says we cannot do this because every single one are feeding rat colonies throughout the city. But the city came back through the mayor and basically said, we're not changing anything about our litter baskets or our operation. And all the IPM's team went right out of it. I was like, you can't do that. I'm talking about IPM. It's sanitation. Are you crazy? You got to embrace IPM. Otherwise, we're going to rely on pesticides. What's the story? We're not changing. It's almost like deal with it, rodentologist. To this day, no change. But to this day, if you have rat droppings on your stoop, as a New Yorker, you're fine. They will issue a fine against you. But right away, things begin to take these certain turns like, goodness, I always teach and I've had taught, especially in New York City and cities I go to, I say, look, it's pretty simple. No food equals no rats. This is a mammal. It must have food. And I didn't do this with AI. That rat happens to have selected a piece of pizza. Well, here they are coming back to the family. This is mom and dad. Look at the size of those heads, very sturdy animals. This is the family waiting for mom and dad to come back, right? There's a whole big family thing that goes down, which we don't have time for, but they are highly sophisticated in the way they teach young and the way the young learn what's food and where is food. This one picture, actually, this won the Wildlife Photography Award of the Year. This particular photograph of all submitted for wildlife photographs. This one won it. And it was Charlie's. Well, just to wrap this piece up is single rat running down the street in New York City. If we come along and we stomp our foot and scare this rat. Isn't that amazing? It just disappears right before our eyes. That took 4.5 seconds. House mouse trucks at 7 feet per second when it moves. So these animals are with us. In some cases, if you ask anybody that walks up and down the street constantly, day in, day out, do you see any rats? No, there's no rats in the street. Like, why don't you come back tonight at 11 o'clock? Because it seems like the sidewalk grows the rats. People say to me, I don't know, where'd they pop out of? This is kind of crazy. I'm walking my dog and all of a sudden I turn around and there's rats all over the street. Where'd they come from? All below that, because that street, we've sounded, with sounding sticks and stuff, totally hollowed out. There's the rats below. So my field, urban rodentology, just like urban entomology, this kind of thing, of course, deals with the rodents. That's the house mouse. As I mentioned before, you're actually looking at the second most successful mammal on planet Earth. This is number 2, house mouse. Mus muscens, which translated means little thief. Okay, from Sanskrit. And so this is the animal. This is actually the animal that owns most cities. It's not the rats. The rats get all the press. They are a big issue, without a doubt, but the house mouse owns New York City. But because it's not large and it's scary and this kind of thing, most people, well, you know, it's a mouse. What's the big deal? Well, Johns Hopkins just this past year, for example, the research keeps pouring in. Experiment reveals strategic thinking in mice. When I was an exterminator, I told everybody that I went across, I said, you know, I'm going to work with in your basement on mouse control. It's just a little varmint. It does nothing but instinct. And if I put out a box with a hole in it, the mouse is very curious. It must go in things because it's very curious. All that's just not true at all. But we didn't have the science, right? And as the science keeps coming in, and right now, the fact of the matter is, many mice in many areas will not go anywhere near a new piece of equipment in their environment. Totally disregard it. And it's a big issue for the pest control industry because they're putting out lots of equipment and the mice are just, no, thank you. What in the world would Heimlich maneuver have to do with anything? No research. Mouse-to-mouse resuscitation rodents try to revive unconscious buddies. This mouse is actually trying to get the tongue out of the way of this mouse trying to breathe, just like we would do. I'm like, this has to be AI generated. But it's not. It's not. And so the point is, there's so much we don't know yet about all kinds of things. And those of we met with today, the grad students and the students that I sat with and what have you, you know, we know so little, but we're increasing our rate of what we do learn about these animals, you know, and it just goes on and on. But of course, here's our friend that we just saw in the sewers. Same in Indiana, in Indianapolis, South Bend, of course, on to Chicago and so forth. This is the rat of the Midwest. Called the Norway rat or the brown rat. It's not from Norway, it's actually from Mongolia, but oh well. And so this is the rat, there's rats here in Lafayette, West Lafayette. I was there in the staff, there were some places I was going. I slept in barns in Delphi here when I was in grad school, slept with the rats in Delphi in those barns while I was in grad school. And so I could learn about rats and so forth. Looking back, it was some of the best times I've ever had. So tool used by rats, tool choice based on tool features. So I'm just putting these up as to, yep, smart animals. They do select tools, they do use them. I've captured it in the field. You know, if we look at some cams, this is a rat in a ceiling space. This bar here is to a snap trap. This rat's first encounter, it's pitch black. This is being done with infrared kind of thing. And so this rat's coming across to encounter a trap that's never been there before this. And we put it to tool use. So this rat's like, okay. First reaction, it's called the first object reaction, where they're like skittish, whoa. And people say, yeah, but they should have used a better bait. That rat's trying to set that off with the nearest tool using wire. Now, in my life, and as a consultant, what have you, I've been in many jobs where people say, you're not going to believe what we've captured on cam. Now that we have all these cams, is we have rats picking up sticks, setting off traps so they can get the bait, then they take the bait. We're like, no, that's a bunch of baloney. Years ago, I said, no, it's no way. It's way. This is a bakery I was hired to help them with. This is a artisan bakery in Brooklyn, New York. And they said, you got to come help us. Tell us what to do with these. We have a rat that keeps attacking our bread kind of thing. And do you have any plans? What should I use? Traps, baits, and this kind of thing? So when I got talking to the head artisan baker, who this is a very, very popular bakery within Brooklyn, he said, you know, I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to believe it, but I want to tell you, the rat actually comes and he finds the best bread that I make here, the top seller. It's actually the most expensive too, but it's my pride and joy of being an artist with how I do this. That rat finds that bread, no matter where I put it in the long string of breads and rolls. If I mix it up and it was here today, tonight he'll attack that spot. If I hide it all the way over there and today, he'll find that bread, he'll bypass every other bread, and every time it's the same bread, the best bread. Because these animals are just so sophisticated in how they select foods and how they disregard other foods and so forth, all the way down to the grains of bread that have been baked. So, it's just an animal that the more I've been at this now for so long, right? And I just feel like, and I don't know, I know 10%, I'll use E.O. Wilson as his famous quote, how much do we know about the biological world? E.O. Wilson said probably 10%. Like, sign me up. So it's just animals, it goes on. And finally, this is New York City, a ticket machine to get on the subway. And there's a rat, if you go to get your change at this machine at this time, there's actually a rat that went in from the back, worked this way through the guts of the machine, ended up there at the window, and is caught in there, and he's trying to get out. So go ahead, get your change, kind of thing. Now, eventually, someone not paying really close attention just comes by, lifts that up, and boom, out comes the rat and jumps away and so forth. But they'll work it out. Do any of you here work in agricultural orientation? Okay, quite a few, this kind of thing. So probably out in the crops, whether it's corn or soybeans, whatever, if you're out there enough over the season, you're going to see voles and the various field mice, permiscus mice, and harvest mice, and these kinds of things in Indiana. And it's like they can do this easily. Like I do this all the time. I just gymnast, and I swing back and forth on the stems and eat the grain at the same time. And people are like, yeah, look at how cool these agricultural mice are, kind of thing. Like, well, we have nothing on it with the city, kind of thing. So they have their own kinds of gymnastics that they do. The rodent populations, for sure, they're on a big rise, part of a, study, but first we back it up and we say, okay, so what do we know now about putting the whole thing together? This paper is just outstanding, and the scientists that put this together is just such a well-done paper, but it's the ratting of North America, not just the US, 350-year retrospective on rat species, compositions, and competition. The list of scientists here cover the whole thing. Great genetics, great molecular work, great, systematics, rodentologists, the whole thing. Basically, and it's 2024, this kind of thing came out. We now know that they were here in American shores probably 50 years earlier than that was anticipated for all this time, right? So no big surprise, but how it happened and on both shores and what have you, it is what's totally fascinating. To keep it simple, this is where I worked. This is New York City. Actually, my office still to this day is right around here, kind of thing. And every slip is filled with the New World trade. And that's how it all went down over 350 years, is all these ships are bringing rats and mice, both species were not native to this area at all, but from around the world, literally. So a lot of those ships and rodents and ships go totally hand in hand. Many stories from captains in their journal saying the rats ate everything on board this past month. Now we don't have supplies and so forth. So they're constantly bringing these invasive species in. This is a paper as part of another team. Increasing rat numbers in cities are linked to climate warming, urbanization, and human population. Right? We increased. So we weren't surprised by the results. 19 of us working on this together and so forth. But why do you think it's in such a big advantage for the rodents when we have global warming? What would pay off for the rodents to keep increasing in numbers with global warming. First, I should throw out that of course, they do not hibernate. Rats and mice cannot hibernate. But what happens when you have a super cold winter over and over again? First,
Rats are gonna die over the winter.
yes, so this is the first thing. So in general, super cold winters, unless they have a really good nest, they're gonna be victims of, they're gonna die from the cold, from exposure, right? If they do have a good nest and they can get through it, they'll survive it. But they say, using anthropomorphizing it, they'll say, look, it's so cold, we can't have young. Because the young will die because we're not going to be able to sit on the nest all the time. So they shut down reproduction during winters is the bottom line. They shut it down. And then they pick it up in the spring and again in the fall before the winter hits again. But now with repeating mild winters, I'm sure everybody knows we've just gone through a decade where we've had the warmest decade in the history of record keeping for all weather data. So the rodents can respond by like, well, if I can eke out just one more litter that I could not have with the cold winters, or even a half a litter, big time numbers, you do the math on, our selected species and how they get it done, it's gonna be the kind of thing where that's a lot of rats as the years go by. This is how I see the world, I guess, especially as it keeps increasing. Everywhere I go, the calls I get for international travel, everywhere I go I was in New Zealand, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, and they're like, you gotta help us. Auckland has never seen this many rodents. Auckland, right? Norway is up. Norway, Oslo is like, you got to help us. We've never seen this many rodents. So it's a situation where it's totally of major concern, and then it translates to this. And as Dr. Hill mentioned, I have an office down and work regularly with the New York City Department of Health, and my job is rodent research. And so we're the purview agency that people say, we see so many rats around the city, what is the city doing about it? As if the city could actually do something about it. Ones that really can do something about it is the public. People say, look, I don't want fancy garbage cans. I'm fine with these plastic ones. And so it's these kinds of complications when we think about IPM it's really critical to be able to implement IPM really does take everybody. So another study we did with Columbia, basically we went around with virologists and bacteriologists from Columbia, really top-notch medical school, top-notch virologists and what have you. And we collected rats and mice throughout New York City, the real deal areas from apartment buildings and basements and stores and what have you, and turned them over to the people that know how to extract all whatever's going on, if you will, epidemiologists and the profiler reports. Scientific American took the referee journal piece and published and put it in terms of, as you can see, but editors are they have to be very specific about the words they select. New York City mice are packed. They didn't say contain pathogens, packed. So we're going to put that piece together, and see how, what's the ramifications. This was the science march a couple of years ago. 2 gals walking around, got plague? Me neither, thank a scientist. And that's this. That's all of this. Right, in one way or another, especially for pest management science, but if it's crop protection through insects, for food production and so forth, one way or another, it's about global public health and general health of human beings. And these rodents do threaten that. What's more, and we were talking about this with the students and what have you, it's not just pathogens. So this study, these scientists here, which in my opinion, these are top rodentologists in the world right here. Chelsea Hemsworth out of University of British Columbia, out of Canada, Byers, Cox, Lambs, Hemsworth. They did this beautiful study published in 2019. You can see the impacts extend beyond damage. Living with rodents can elicit fear, anger, stress, worry, exhaustion, sleep disturbance, and avoidance. So as I put together a piece using one example here in a second, but I think all of us can relate that if you see a mouse in your apartment, wherever you live, in a house, wherever you live, if you see a mouse scurry across the living room while you're relaxing, watching TV or reading a book or something like that, it's going to get your attention. You're like, what's that and what's going on? And you're not probably going to like it. If you see a rat scurry across that same floor and disappear below some kind of furniture or something, you're not getting sleep. And you're not going to bed till you can account for that rat in some way if you take the place apart. And if you don't have that rat by the next day and you have to go back to work or something, you're going to be thinking about that rat. We can't dismiss. These animals whack us out is the bottom line. It's an animal that really gets to us. So if we take this whole business of pest management science, we look at some of the overlapping basic principles. This is how since 1996, when I went into consulting full-time from Purdue, these are my clients. This is what I've been doing since 1996, building a client base. But I work in large entities. I don't work with homes, individual homes. I don't work on, hey, there's a mouse in my garage. Can you come look at it? So I work with designing programs for big cities, airports. I design airport programs for rodent control, large museums, as you can see, that's it. But I want to particularly select out just something to show how IPM in an urban setting with this particular pest, can sometimes come together. I do want to stress, there is no standard rodent population and it's highly specific. Now, I put this up here, everybody, because a lot of times in the pest control industry, if you have a mouse problem or a rat problem in a home or a grocery store or whatever, oftentimes what will happen is the technicians will be sent out and they will put out a lot of equipment. And they'll put out the equipment in some standard placement of like, well, you have mice on the inside of the grocery store, I'm going to put out these multiple cat traps or snap traps or something along these lines. They're going to put them out at about every 15 to 20 feet, and that should control the mice inside. On the outside, they'll put out bait boxes, these black boxes around the perimeter, and they'll have poison baits in them in case the mice or the rats are to encounter those boxes, and they'll eat the poison, and they will, quote, prevent you from having interior rodents. But that model really is not that strong. Because there's no standard, but yet we'll have a standard application of equipment coast to coast, what I just described. And so in part, this rodent explosion is not just global warming. It's in part is we don't get to zero control very often unless it's a private house, in a garage, couple of mice, go out, do your thing, and yes, you got rid of the mice in our home environment. But if we carry this further, using these steps, right? Here's our, I know everyone in this, seminar knows that these are the elements of a standard, quote, IPM program, right? But I'm just inserting rodents, site-specific, species-specific assessment has to be done. Can't show up with equipment. No, let's just start putting out equipment. That's a treatment before anything has been established. Monitoring is a formal piece of monitoring is a formal piece of IPM. Can't skip that one step. There has to be a profile put together of the resources the rodents are using. What kind of food, what kind of harborage, the typical things is, how does that look? So forth, and how do we manage those resources? Structural exclusion, non-chemical approaches, and finally, which IPM always states in any textbook, anybody's gonna read about integrated pest management, pesticides as a last resort. And I have there if only. Because in most cities, exterior bait boxes are put out with poisonous baits immediately. Because it gets sold as, we're protecting you from rodents that show up here. So, because we back it up with like, well, we want to protect the property from rodents, you shouldn't be calling them to that property to begin with. Because rodents learn very quickly if a property doesn't reward them, whether it be an office tower, a restaurant, the dumpsters, what have you, they're not coming back. It's all based on reward. So taking you to my world, and this actually is, just a picture I took 2-3 weeks ago. I'm looking across, my office is right behind this building, that black building there. That's where my office is. And I show this picture, this is Lower Manhattan, for those of you who've not been there, this is, this is the Hudson River, it's beautiful, it's a great city, it really is, it's terrific. That's the Freedom Tower as a result of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Centers, what have you. But I can tell you with assurance that just about every building you see here has mice. Not every one, but just about. I've been in a whole bunch of these and continue to be in them. And it's an issue of, you look at below the streets, if we were to use this diagram and pull the street up, as you can see, almost like, pulling it out of its roots and this kind of thing, that's what's below. And rodents are tunneling animals by their very nature before they were in cities. So everything here simulates you're in the right environment for a rodent. It's a tunnel through the earth. There's water, there's insects, there's all kinds of issues, and there's sewers, and so forth. There's our little subway train kind of thing. So, but this is a major reason why we hear the myth that if there's construction, there's going to be rodents. It's half true, because the rodents do populate these infrastructures. So when anyone digs up the street, you are going to displace rats and mice. But if the rats and mice aren't there, of course, and you have all the construction you wish, you're not going to have rodent problems. I mentioned I do work in airports, which I do, several airports. They say, write us a program, design us a program so that the cases of rats and mice getting on our airplanes is minimal. So it has to be airport wide. I have to do every terminal. I have to look at all the restaurants in the airport. I have to look at all the planes, where the stage, what times, these kinds of things. I have to look at how they do all their trash, where they stage a crash overnight, so forth. I have to look at employee locker rooms, the whole thing. Because the issue is, this plane that I took this picture of, for example, is waiting for early morning flight. Right across the wall is the baggage claim area where baggage is held and processed and all kinds of things, and getting passengers ready and this kind of thing. All night long, for the most part, there's work going in and out of that baggage claim. The plane gets a whole load of this going across the country. It gets a whole load of, food, snacks, odors, all kinds of things, get shipped in, puts on the plane. Rodents can leave the baggage claim, climb up, and they do climb up right here into the plane. Then they work their way throughout the plane, including the cockpit, and many times into the interstitial spaces above everybody's heads, where there's wire bundling, miles of wire. What does the word rodent mean?
Chew.
So Dr. Mason says to gnaw, And she's totally right. Rodent, as you break down his word, means to gnaw, Gnaw, which is not necessarily chewing. Chewing is to masticate your food and this kind of thing. Not being nitpicky, but gnawing is you just use tools and they have inside your teeth actually to create holes and get through things and to use them as tools. Well, rodents love to gnaw on wires. Why? Because they look like plant stems. Not because the wires are making noise that drives them crazy and they have to stop it, right? So having rats or mice on a plane is a very big deal indeed. Now, if the plane is going overseas and someone spots rodent droppings or evidence of rodents, it can't fly, it's not allowed to fly. I fly a lot. Quite honestly, every time I get on a plane, I'm looking at the ceiling thinking, please, no rodent. I don't want any of my wires on a plane chewed, right? No more than two. So it's the kind of thing where to keep the mice off the planes, which is not uncommon, you can Google this yourself, as rodents on planes, it has to be a very comprehensive IPM program throughout that airport. With a lot of cooperation, and the head of the airport in charge, and even the FAA say, you will do this, you will do what the experts say you need to do. Planes have been brought down by rodents. American Airlines, it's online, you can find it. They were fined $700,000 for having mouse chewed wires not too long ago, 700 grand in fines. So it's the kind of thing, they get into shopping malls, they can ceiling in shopping malls. This is my picture, this is one of my clients over time and this kind of thing. And those ceilings on every level that you see were filled with rats. As you walk through the shopping mall, you could actually, if you knew what the odor was, just like when I looked at the German cockroaches, today on my tour with Jose, it was a case like, holy cow, the smell of German cockroaches concentrated, you cannot miss that. When I walk through a shopping mall full of rats, I'm like, holy cow, you have rats. Like, how can you tell that? I'm like, you have rats. So every one of these ceilings, and it was our job, as a consultant, I put the whole thing together. I said, here's how we have to do this. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a tremendous amount of money to get rid of these rats. And worse, it's going to be a tremendous amount of money to bioremediate this shopping mall to get rid of all the droppings in urine that have saturated all the ceilings because you had crummy pest control service for 5 years. They actually grew the rats while they were paying for thinking they were getting control of the rats. So then you have to sit down in a war room, so to speak, and work it out. But you have to work it out with IPM. Because the rats were that numerous, because the refuse program was completely ridiculous. No care for how they threw out the garbage, no care as to leaving restaurants full of garbage all over the place at night because everybody was exhausted, needed to go home after working so hard all day. It's like, we'll clean up the restaurant tomorrow morning, bright and early. All night long, and many of those restaurants gorging all over the place. I work in zoos. I was just I work with the National Smithsonian. I just wrote their plan a month ago, right? But I've been working with them for some time. But here, you don't have a choice to say, well, we put out some black boxes with rat poison because rats love zoos. So do mice. So you're going to have to be really, really careful how you're going to control rats and mice in a zoo without any pesticides. Not easy. So this is one of my favorite quotes. I mean, how can you go wrong quoting Albert Einstein, right? Nobody's going to disagree with you on that. But among all his favorite quotes, for me in my career, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It's the source of all true art and science. I think my love for pest management, whether it be insects or whether it be rodents, is the mystery. That just drives me like, I have got to figure out what's going on. How are they doing this? How are the mice getting on the planes? How are the mice getting into the office tower? What's their life cycle? Where are they doing their breeding? All those pieces and parts, it just makes it fun for me to try to put it together as a consultant. But I need that science as strong as I can get it. to do that. I can't just, hey, let's just guess. You know, but this fits pest management in a huge way. So I do work in alleyways in cities. So instead of sleeping in barns in Delphi, my career ended up here. Just as cool. There's a mysterious alleyway in the dark with rodents scurrying around and this kind of thing. I'm like, where are they living? What's their food source? What's their home ranges? How do they travel? Is it vertical? Is it only horizontal? That's in that alleyway, right? Now the rats, I call it rat o'clock. I know exactly when they're going to start showing up. So it's the kind of things, some photographer took this picture and this kind of thing, and he was asking me, he goes, it looks like you're having fun. And I am having. Like, you're having fun diving through trash and being in dirty alley, this kind of thing. I'm like, yeah. Because it's biology. So if we look at this tower right here, this very tall tower, super famous building. This is on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River, very famous building. It's filled with thousands of traders, financial traders of world-class, top of the world-class people. And mice have infiltrated this tower. And the fascinating thing about it is they're in all different floors, showing up here and there, popping across during meetings and so forth. The people that work in this building at the very top, they have offices that overlook the beauty of the whole New York City skyline and what have you. They have literally $50 billion deals at tables at this building. No exaggeration. So these are billionaires, these are multi-billionaires, there's traders all the way up doing world financial trading at a very hectic pace. Before I dive in just for a second on this, in the built environment with the cryptobiotic urban species, right? Things like rats, mice, cockroaches, carpenter ants, bats, those are cryptobiotic, meaning secretive biologies. It's about the inaccessible depths of the structure. Engineers over the years, and I learned this a long time ago, they said, you know, from an engineering contractor point of view, once that building is done, finished, and we're ready for occupation, you only have access, human being, to half of it. So who has the other half? The roaches, the ants, the rats, the mice. So it breaks down like this. I call it voidology because pests, of course, need harborage once they're in our buildings, simulating the harborages they have before the building. Little nooks and crannies and little caves and little spaces in between tree trunks and so forth. Those are our walls, floors, ceiling equipment, furniture, facades. Then you have the interstitial spaces, which are incredibly numerous in a building. And then we have the chases where we put all our wire bundling and plumbing trees and refuge trees and the whole 9 yards. This is the inside of that building. And you can see every single chair. This is one floor of traders doing business every day. I'm there because they're like, you know, everyone's concentrating, everyone's working hard, you know, they're talking to clients, they're doing all kinds of important decisions. I had no idea the world of finance was even, and this is just one company, one floor, right? It was this enormous and this complex. But the employees sitting here, some of them, they work on, you know, bonuses at the end of the year that are huge 6 numbers. And so you like, hey, you know, they said, look at here on the floor, all these portals, because down below that floor is a floating, it's called a floating floor. All their wires, all their cabling, all their fancy global high-speed stuff gets channeled below the floor. Then occasionally you'll have some employees. If you walk through here, you'll see mostly clean desks, but every once in a while, a desk with chips and cookies falling out, dropping on the floor and so forth. And of course, a delivery comes in somewhere in the past in a box just like this, and it has mice in it, and it's off to the races. But just like the bread that I showed, a mouse nest will develop let's say just down here, that's why I took this picture, this was like a month ago. Right down here, the mouse nest's all tied up in a bundle of wires for their nest, comes out, they know which desks to visit, and they mark them with mouse pheromones. So then everybody starts screaming. There's a mice, there's a mouse. Back to how they whack us out. When employees, I hate mice, I can't stand it, I cannot work here. This is driving me nuts, now I have to concentrate, I can't do it. You have walkouts. After several, employees say, that's it, and they get online and they read up to say, mice are packed with pathogens, and I found mouse turds on my desk. You expect me to work here? I don't think so. So then bring in the pest people, bring in a consultant. So for me, there's like, you have to take care of this. Tell us what we need to do. Is it a poison? Is it a trap? Should we use ultrasonic machines? What do we do? You're back to the war room. And you're back to IPM, big time. Because for me, I'm like, well, the employers aren't gonna like it, but IPM is the only way to go here. No more eating at desks. First thing, PR comes in, so that is not gonna happen. Our employees need their water, they need some snacks, they need some sugar, they're working hard, they're working like crazy. We are not going to say no more food. Okay, so let's work on your lab food, but let's do things like Tupperware dishes and keeping everything tight and having a monitor that, without being intrusive like a police cop that comes in and says, you're, because these employees are making other employees a lot of money. Some of them real brainiacs with doing that, and it's like, look, that employee down there, superstar. But so me and a team, we have to take this place apart. Literally, we start pulling all these tunnels. We're going into the subflooring. We have to go up the chases that are supporting the building with interstitial spaces. So notice here, another shot of the same thing, a different angle. Everybody has a litter basket. I said, well, here's the deal. By come nighttime, every litter basket has to be empty. These have to be empty. They cannot be when the mice are most active at night. Well, we're not structured for that. And I'm like, well, honestly, we can't do this. Can't feed the mice and then expect to trap them in traps, which they won't pay any attention to because they already have their food source. So back to the mysterious. This is underneath one of those desks that I just showed. Where are the mice nesting? In that box. That's a particular type of box for a particular type of cable system. And most of it, once you get through, if you follow this up, most of it is a warm, hollow space. And mice must have warmth to rear young. Must, no choice, right? And so they're actually a whole family of mice. That's why I'm taking this picture in that box. And as they come out, they scurry around the floor and scare people and screaming and the whole thing. But there's thousands of those boxes in that building. So we need help with something like that. We are and what have you, but some people say, well, how are you going to monitor this whole thing of IPM? How are you going to monitor the mouse population of this financial center that has a serious problem on 6 floors now, so forth and so on? And you could do it with people, a lot of time, a lot of hours, a lot of consulting charges, right? But we are getting help. Now technology enters the scene. We have remote pest monitors and we have cams, rodent cams, of course, like wildlife cams. Let me push that back on. So here's one sensor that we worked with for years. I've been actually working with sensors as part of the New York City Smart City deal for 15 years. I've been working with sensors. The first sensor was as big as a cigar box. Now I can close my hand, you won't be able to see it. And so the rodent goes into an area and I get it on my iPhone. Mouse at cubicle number 42, aisle 16-4. I can push a dashboard, it comes out. It's kind of just made, you can get the geo mapping of every single sensor. This is, in fact, this person holding this is another Purdue grad, Joe DeMark. And so we did a warehouse. I said, every one of those green dots is a sensor for rats invading this warehouse. So I can do that in any building. I can do it in shopping malls. I can do it in airports. This is where I bring the sensors. You know, that is becoming that. Sorry to skip, you know, it's technology. And AI is going to play into this in a major, major way. It's already being queued up for not only will we know we have a mouse or rat, we will know if it's a male or female. That's important. Very important to know who it is, male or female. We will know if it's a juvenile or an adult. We'll know what species through AI. All that's coming very quickly, very quickly. So we can have dashboards where we just record all the data. You know, we begin to put together data maps and what have you. One of the biggest projects I'm working on, well, it's my number one project, quite frankly, is putting these sensors throughout the cities. We just set up Boston, you know, they have like 650 sensors. You put them in the right spot, and it's like reading traffic jams, except you're reading rodent jams as to who's reporting in around the city. So that technology is forthcoming. Obviously, you put out a camera, whether it's a wildlife camera. Now this camera is being made very specifically for rodent tracking versus tracking deer and doing deer hunting and so forth. You know, but a cam, you know, we refer to it as the sebum squeeze point. When rodents squeeze in areas, you know, sometimes it's possible to find them. This rat is actually in a residential environment, and it went for weeks and weeks of trying to get this rat in this residence. The rat would not respond to any of the delicious baits that were being put out to try to lure it over. Everything, seafood, tuna fish, sausage, meat, so forth. Nothing. And we didn't know where it was living until we set up a cam. It's a clean kitchen, nice kitchen, so forth. But a cam finally gave it up. It was right in front of everybody all the time. It was squeezing into that voidology, right? Into that base cabinet void right there. And it's right there. Now, what showed up in the infrared that was being missed by technician is that. They left sebum, which sebum is the grease off your forehead. That's the same thing. Your grease off your forehead is called sebum from sebaceous glands. And so they have sebum. They don't take shampoo in the morning like we do and so forth. They can't get rid of it. So everywhere they travel a lot with it, they leave a sebum trail. So cams are just incredibly. Let me end with do-it-yourself rodent control. A short little vid. This is the backyard warrior. There's rats. There's rat burrows right here, and he's poured gasoline down the rat burrows. You know how this is going to go. It's not going to go well. But he's poured gasoline down the rat burrows, and his wife or somebody's taking his picture. He's about to light this match and blow up the rats. The dogs are sitting there watching like, hey, look at Henry.
Yeah.
And that's the reality, right? Do it yourself. This is why, quite honestly, because one of the biggest deals right now that's happening as we visit is the decision to whether or not to restrict rodent poisons to the public. Rodent poisons do not belong in the hands of the public. I fight as strong as I can and been invited to special sessions with the Environmental Protection Agency as to weigh in on this. But it's a $5.6 billion industry just to the public without any training that they have whatsoever. We sell $5.6 billion in rodent poisons to the do-it-yourselfers. To the pest professionals, they buy 78 million a year. So you can see they do not want to stop selling online. Because you can buy anything the professionals have through Amazon. And it was meant for professionals. But it's that kind of a mind that's like, hey, I bought this on Amazon. Let me put it out in the yard for the rats. So forth. Finally, a play on the house mouse, right? It's called the house mouse because it's in houses. So this is truly a mouse house.
This is great.
Oh, these are mice at the window. They're licking the windows for condensation for their water. So you can imagine if you go through the front door, what you're going to encounter. So, this is probably most of my travels, these cities I work in regularly, from Boston on down. The East Coast is a very big metropolis in general, for obvious reasons, they're so closely connected. But this is human population density, and rats and mice track human density very closely for obvious reasons. Right? So I'm going to stop here. Keep us on time. I'll take questions on anything I just covered and how IPI ties into anything at all. Any questions? Yep.
I know that sometimes like mental health can play a big part in people having pest infestations like in their own houses. Do you do kind of like any work on the IPM front, like as far as mental health advocacy and like physical health advocacy to like try to help people avoid the problem in their own homes who might be, I guess, more at risk for things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, the mental health aspect of this, and do we try to do, in some way support that as to here's how to, keep it in perspective, here's what can be done and, to help, with the stress that this is causing. So that part, I'd probably say, at least for my consulting, no, right? But through New York City Public Health and mental hygiene, right, with that particular title, there are leaflets and information they put out as to what constitutes a rat infestation or a mouse infestation, how to get help, what's your role in doing this, do it right, don't just go out and buy poisons and this kind of thing. So then indirectly, do we get to your question of by doing that, helping on the stress? Because that study, as you just saw, it very stressful to have a rodent problem, and even people say, oh, it's just a mouse. Well, maybe to you or anybody, it's just a mouse, but a lot of people are totally stressed out seriously with a mouse in the house.
Thank you.
Yes.
How many rats can a unit have?
Yes. All right. So what's the reproduction numbers for the rat? So the typical rat under average conditions with average amount of food resource, they'll produce 18 to 16 pups. Typically, if you want to pick an average there, it's going to come in around 9 or 10, right? Somewhere in that particular area, right? And they'll have, the reality is, in most cases, if a female has one litter, raises them successfully, that's success. Technically, if you get on Wikipedia, someplace like this, they'll say, well, they constantly are mating, and so they can produce several litters in a year. Well, in a cage someplace, that's true. In reality of real world cities and stresses, they have all kinds of stresses themselves put upon them and all kinds of predators and so forth. But one good litter a year by a rat is going to be successful. But then they can have, under ideal conditions, a couple of those litters, right? The difference here, which is really important, is it takes the rat about 3 months to become sexually mature. So that's somewhat of a progress. Once it gets to a certain point, it's logarithmic growth after that. The house mouse, right? Ralph and I used to talk about this all the time when I was, studying with Ralph in poultry houses and livestock. The house mouse in poultry houses in Indiana, for example, can hit reproductive potential in 5 weeks, right? So there, and that's, we remember all those massive numbers, right, Ralph, in our poultry houses. I used to go into the poultry house with Ralph at night and we're just, all the floors were covered with mice, completely covered in fur. Because the poultry house is in fact the highest density ever recorded for mouse populations. Yeah, yes.
So since rats have 18 to 16 litters average, how much does a house mouse have?
Thank you. So so if we look at the house mouse, then we flip it, really important question, 5 to 7, right? So 5 to 7 pups for the house mouse.
Oh, okay.
And then the house mouse can, because of that, have several litters and very fast turnover for sexual
Yeah,
reproduction.
they have a faster maturity rate than rats.
Totally right.
Mhm.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So you talked about earlier in the presentation how like garbage bins had to be removed every day because, which I mean, in of itself is like a huge feat, but like recently I've been seeing lots of photos. I have friends who live in the city who've sent me photos of like garbage pile up like in the streets and like that's like perpetuating. How has that impacted the rat populations in the city? I imagine that is a lot of harborage. I think like grain pests, if there's spillage, that's like harborage for them as well. So
There's the parallel, right? There's the
Yeah.
parallels. We cross over from invertebrates to vertebrates and these kinds of things. So yes, so in New York City, in fact, New York City grew its rats. New York City is responsible for those numbers because New York City back in 1971 said, we are going to switch from garbage cans to plastic bags. And we're going to put these plastic bags out on the street so the garbage professionals can grab 4 bags at a time, throw them into the truck, and keep moving because there's so many people in New York City, we can't keep up with it if we did it with cans. Well, by switching the bags, all the rats have ate these bags every single night, gorged themselves on all that fresh food. So the rats basically had, no matter what block you went on in New York City, for example, there was food available by people putting them out in bags. It's crazy, but they did that all since 1971. So just this past year, it's back to basics of New York City. The mayor said, the new mayor said, how do we get rid of the rats? Is it better bait, more exterminators? We sat with them. We said, there's only one way out of this complete mess, and that is no more food. The only way we're going to do that is go back to containers. So what happened? They went to Europe, studied Spain of all cities, and went into Barcelona and said, look at the way they do their trash. We brought that back to New York City. We have containerization laws now that you must have all trash in containers. And we're using a European model. It already is paying off. We're seeing dramatic decreases in rats on blocks throughout New York City just by switching back to containers, right? No food, no rats. And even with some food, if it's enough for, say, to have 3 pups, it'll be 3 pups. You know, if there's enough food to have 12, it'll be 12. It's like that. They actually will start, and I saw it during the pandemic, they start killing themselves and fighting and aggression and leaving and all kinds of stress, and they die. So it's no food, just like us. No food, no life. Yep.
Do you know if like the rat gnawing in planes has ever been implicated in like a fatal plane crash?
Yes, so had the rat knowing.
Has anyone got a fly soon?
Yeah, I'm terrified of flying, so this is gonna be on my mind forever.
So the good news is now, you know, because of those kinds of things with frayed wires and so forth, although it still happens, they still get fines, right? So has it been confirmed of plane crashes from wires? Yes, it has been confirmed, right? So, but now it's much less, one, because of the heavy fines, and 2 is airports know that they have to have a very structured program, you know, and the airports I work in, you know, believe me, it's got to be down to every single detail because they have to show due diligence that they did everything possible to minimize rats getting and mice getting on planes. Well,
Give you 2 cents on cats as a biological control.
forget about it. Yeah, so for the cat, anyway, cats are great. I love cats, had a cat and everything. But let them out of the house, there's trouble, and they do not control rats or mice.
We're gonna end with a couple of great photos. Do you recognize this photo, Bobby? Does anybody recognize some people in this photo? What about this guy here? This is you, Bobby, right? That's Steve Yananek. Okay, next one. Do you recognize this
Oh my
photo?
goodness.
That's you, right?
Wow.
We've got some great photos that have been kept over time, and I had thanks to actually to Emily, our outreach coordinator, and Steve Yananek, and I had some fun going back through some files, and I managed to find this one. So
I don't know if you guys still have it, but we called that the bullpen. Is there still a bullpen, a graduate student bullpen?
sort of. Where was this?
It's Entomology Hall, second floor.
Oh, okay.
At the end.
All right. Well, we might be going back to Entomology Hall one day, so maybe you'll all be back in the Entomology Hall bullpen, but I bet it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for visiting with us. Congratulations again.
That's crazy. I had no idea.
You wanna see it?
Yeah, no.
Some other photos of you from like this.
Sorry to say, introduce myself. I wasn't even thinking it's me, yeah.
No problem. Yeah, someone in Med covered you, they said, oh, no, you know. So what do you say?
So. Doing salmonella.